This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, on Talk Radio 77 WABC, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, there's so much to discuss on the program today. Let's talk about Amsterdam and the horror that occurred there. Pogrom, an attack on Jews because they were Jews, attending, a soccer game, Maccabi Tel Aviv versus Ajax, the local team in Amsterdam. And to be attacked because you're a Jew is reminiscent of Kristallnacht, because the dates are very close to one another, when Jews were being attacked in Germany because they were Jews. So here we are years later, and we're back to that hatred of Jews that never seems to go away.
As you know, Rabbi, I was in London this past week in the UK, and I will tell you, it was the only thing that was consistently on the news from one broadcast to another, especially on BBC, because of the outrage. And they warned that, the images would not be easily digested, the public, because to see that kind of brutality in the street. There's a big problem. Let me ask you something, Rabbi. Is there some text, some prophetic text that speaks about the rise of anti-Semitism? Just curious.
That's a good question about hatred that never goes away. I think when we talk about, for example, Esau returned to his place where he was, there are those who say, you see, that bitterness between Esau and Jacob. It never stopped. It never stopped. He returned to his place, which means to the place he was in the hatred of his brother. And I think we are revisiting this. We found all of these cures for all of these diseases, but not the disease of anti-Semitism. And this is just shameful. And the question is, where were the police? Because there were reports, they were notified that this could occur, and yet they were missing. And you had Israeli government sending in rescue planes. And this is a soccer game. Now, if you're not safe at a soccer game because you're rooting for your team, what does that mean? Where are you safe? You're not safe walking to a sanctuary? Well, you're not safe walking down the street wearing the indicia of being Jewish? What does this mean about our society?
And we have to be careful here because you and I are giving external commentary. We don't know the details of it. But do you think that the police intentionally avoided, or do you think that it's just not realizing how serious the issue is of anti-Semitism globally?
I think overall we've never fully addressed the depth of it. I think we treated, I remember the slaughter that took place in a sanctuary in Pittsburgh, and we saw it in Poway, and we saw other attacks. And what happens? We focus on it for a limited period, then we can revert back to the way it was before. I don't think we are fully cognizant of how dangerous this is. And by the way, if it's dangerous for me today, it's dangerous for you tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's not confined to Amsterdam because it can happen anywhere in the world at any time. So we have to be aware of that. Wow. Yeah. So we have an election result, Rabbi. We've got a new president, and, we pray for him. We pray for his administration. This is our responsibility. We wish him the best because it affects our country, regardless of how we feel about his conduct, his character, all of that. Now it's about governing. The election's over. It's about governing. He's implemented, as far as we know, that she is going to be, or is now officially as Chief of Staff, Susan Wiles. And one of the things that was interesting, Rabbi, she said that she was going to be very careful in terms of access that people have to the president. The number of voices that are speaking to him. How do you respond to that? I think it's very important.
That's what a good chief of staff does. You are the gatekeeper. You are the police person. You have to make sure that you're protecting, the one you serve. And, if you let everybody in there, you have this cacophony of noise. So make sure that the right people need to get in. By the way, the noise you're hearing right now are the Democrats throwing away the playbook. They're just tearing it up. I just keep hearing that
out the window. Right?
Get rid of that one. Get rid of that. And they have pollsters and pundits lining up looking for employment. This is a complete change. And
I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I think that it had to be a decisive win. It had to be, we were concerned about how close it was going to be, et cetera. But it was decisive. I mean, the country has spoken, and in our faith tradition, we believe that God is in charge of all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, he either directs or permits, leaders in power. And I think that was important, that we simply have to say, okay, this was not, a narrow margin. This was a significant win by a significant margin. And now, what do we do? Where do we go from here? How do we work together? How do we begin to build and heal? Am I optimistic on this, Rabbi?
I'm always optimistic. We always say we're prisoners of hope. I think people who lost, or whose candidate lost, have to look within and say, well, why did we lose? And maybe we shouldn't be so angry at the other, but angry at our own, at our own leaders. I mean, people were fed up. They said, we're not going to travel on that path again. But we're gonna talk about this because we have a guest coming up, Dr. Annie Yusim, talk about how do you go forward. And she's a great psychiatrist with great insights. But we need to look at stepping. We just can't look back at the election results. What about the days and weeks after? How do we forge a path where we can walk together in some meaningful way?
Excellent. So stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi, your favorite Sunday morning program, right here on 77 WABC. We'll be right back.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we always know in times of crisis, we turn to Dr. Annie Yusim, who is the author of a best-selling book entitled Fulfilled, how the science of spirituality can help you live a happier, more meaningful life. And we're all for that. And we can talk about what spirituality means, because we often use a different word called religion. But today we want to talk about, in light of the election, how do we move forward in this divided climate? Dr. Yusim spoke to a group of rabbis the other day, Rev, and they were talking about walking into a sanctuary, making a presentation, and that you have people on different sides, and you want them to feel that they belong to one congregation. So, Doctor, how do we make that happen?
Yes, thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be here with the both of you today. Thank you for having me. I think that in light of what has happened, there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of polarization. There was that prior. And now, even more as people are confronted with what is to come in the coming 4 years. Some people are happy with the results of the election, and many, unfortunately, are not. And so the way that we, I think, have to come together is to really focus on our shared values, on that which we all want, which is a healthy, happy existence for ourselves, our families, and those that we love. And we might have different ideas as to how to get there. We might have different conceptions of what that entails. But ultimately, the endpoint that we want, which is safety, good health, fulfillment, is the same thing. And we have to figure out, within a democracy is ongoing. We have the power within this democracy, with the things that we're happy with, to stand behind them, and those that we're not, to take concerted actions and implement change in the way that we are able within the law. So that's number one, is to recognize our power, recognize that we are not powerless, figure out what is within our control, and take the steps that we can. Number two is to embrace empathy and curiosity, to really look at the situation with as much compassion as possible, recognizing that this is happening for us and not to us. And whenever we are confronted with something that is challenging, difficult, painful, that is how we have to see it, and we have to find the good. There's always something good. There's always a silver lining. And if there isn't, we have to create that for ourselves. We have to make it so. That's number 2. And number 3 is creating safe spaces and other opportunities for those of us who have similar fears, similar worries, to come together to recognize that we are not alone. I think this is a really important part of this process, because the majority of people, in their fears, in whatever is ailing them right now, there is many others, whether it be their friends, family, congregation, community, and to create those safe spaces with mindful presence where people can actually come together and have discourse on that. And then finally, I think one of the most important things is self-care. And in times of great stress and duress, figuring out what can you do for oneself? How can you take the best care of yourself possible so that you can show up for what life is demanding of you? Whether that means focusing a little bit more on your sleep, on your diet, on stress reduction, meditation, etc., mindfulness, figuring out how to anchor more in love and not fear, and to take better care of your mind, body, and spirit in order to show up for life.
Mm.
Doc, and it sounds clinical and wonderful, but let's get to the harder question. You have a large portion of the American population who has been traumatized by losing this election. They were emotionally tied to it, psychologically tied to it. And then I want to go to those who won the election and how they should conduct themselves. But let's speak to those who are dealing with the trauma of loss. This is like grief of losing a loved one or something, because of how emotionally charged this whole election cycle has been. What do you say to those who have been traumatized by the loss of this election?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have many patients within my own private practice who feel that way. And the thing with a democracy is that a democracy is constant. It doesn't begin or end with elections. We have to move forward, and we have to make our voices heard, and to do what we need to do to create the kind of country that we want to live in. So this is, there's a beautiful David Seth Kirshner posted something on Facebook that Rabbi Potasnik sent me, and I really, really loved some of his words. He wrote that now is a time for unity in the place of uniformity, for open-mindedness in the place of obstinance, and for prayer and hope in the place of animosity, anger, and hurt. And I think that those words really, really resonate. A lot of people are indeed traumatized, and yet we have to move on, and the democracy is not over, and life continues today, tomorrow, and there's a lot that we must do in order to create the kind of world for ourselves, our families, our children that we want to live in.
Do you think there's going to be a reawakening or reexamination of the other, and recognition that other people are entitled to a different point of view? Yes, there are those who are disappointed with the results, or devastated, however you want to describe the reaction, but there are those who are extremely happy. And how do we get those who are unhappy to say, look, people think differently than me? We have an old tradition in Judaism where if you walk into a room with many people, you say, thank you, God, for creating faces and minds that are different than one another. Now, that sounds good, but how do we implement that into our thinking where the other has value as well, and we don't continue this demonization of someone who's different because we disagree?
If I may, just to piggyback, because it goes on the question, the part 2 of the question that I was asking you, the Rabbi just amplified it nicely. It's speaking to those who won the election.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a responsibility in healing the nation? Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting. I just want to make sure we point it out.
Absolutely. I think 2 really important and beautiful questions that are at the heart of the matter. And indeed, those who won, they do have a responsibility. They have the responsibility to create the best world possible as they see it. And those who lost the election have the responsibility to create the best world possible as they see it. That is really our responsibility to ourselves, to each other. And we may disagree on what that looks like and how that is to come to be, but we are definitely, responsible and have a moral obligation to be able to take the steps within our democracy to live the best life possible, and also to create the discourse necessary to voice our concerns, our fears, and take legal actions that are necessary to uplift, I think, the human spirit at this point. You know, the Rabbi Schneerson, the Lubavitch rabbi, he taught that every individual has the power to bring light into the world. And we need to figure out how can we do that? What is our individual way of bringing that light? And how can we move forward, especially in times of great darkness?
You know, Rev, you've often quoted the prophets. And I was reading an article by Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who's a good friend and very, very bright guy. And he said, you take Jeremiah, and Jeremiah heard about the need to uproot, to pull down, but he didn't hear clearly about planting and building. He heard part of it, but not the building and the planting. And as a result of that, he was replaced by Elisha. And the idea being that if you only focus on uprooting and pulling down, and not the planting and the building, you're not going to succeed. So I would hope that we as faith leaders can bring people together and say, this is an opportunity to build. This is an opportunity to make better. This is an opportunity to learn from, the deficiencies and mistakes of the past, and create a better place where both of us can live together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to recognize that there's more that unites us than divides us, and that it's through kindness and compassion that we can elevate the consciousness of the world.
Does it also say that we need to do more in dialogue between election cycles?
Mm-hmm.
Because the election cycle, really exposes what we've been thinking and doing in between. Do we need to focus on understanding, on better dialogue, better communication, not thinking that civil discourse is a weakness? Do we need to focus on that? And this is somewhat of a rhetorical question, as you know, but I want to hear what you have to say, Doctor, on it.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the most important things here. And what a lot of people are saying is that, the presidential candidate that's been chosen, unfortunately, is not the best model for that sometimes, because there is certain rhetoric that said that, puts certain groups down. And so this is what a lot of people are contesting. And I think that we have to show the opposite. We have to be the examples of compassionate discourse, nonviolent communication, empathy in our speech, and curiosity to understand the viewpoints that are different from our own. And this is what we have to model in our congregations, in our communities, in our classrooms, especially if we feel that that's not being modeled outside.
Rev, let me bring you back to a moment in New York. When we were together, Bishop Victor Brown was very instrumental in convening a gathering in his church of the Garner family, of police, of community, and we all stood there, and we all understood that we have a place, and we're not going to go forward from this anger and hostility unless we go forward together, talk to each other, listen to each other. That's not an easy challenge, but it's a necessity if we're going to create that better space. And as faith leaders, isn't that our obligation?
Rabbi, in response to that, we should take the moral high ground. We should elevate the conversation. That's what we do as faith leaders. But I want to respond to what Dr. Yusim said about the character and conduct of the candidate. There are those who will say, well, have we ever had a presidential candidate who, checked off the boxes? And if so, have they been few and far in between? And instead, should we focus on, the vision, the policies, the platform? How much now? Because it brings in the question, how much conduct and character matter with regard to individual that we're going to give power to? Doctor?
Yes, I think that, at the end of the day, it matters a great deal. And so it's really, really important that the people who we do elect into office do their best to, if there is any sort of weakness within character, to do their best to work on that and to uplift and become the best role models they can, because whether they realize it or not, the kinds of actions that are taken by the leaders of our country trickle down to the youth of our country. People see that as appropriate and legitimate and, examples of model behavior, and then they start to do that as well. So we need presidential candidates, and we also need, in general, all leaders to be individuals who model compassionate communication, nonviolent discourse, rationality, and kindness, and to be able to show that throughout the world. Of course, at times we need good boundaries. People can be impassioned. That's part of being a human being, but never at the expense of the dignity of others. The dignity of others has to be uplifted by the leaders of our country, and that's why we elect them.
Yeah, how do we get that over to social media, right? How do we bring that to social media where people can say whatever they want? It doesn't matter because there's no accountability, and all of a sudden you have these people sending out their, barrage of messages that many don't even read or listen to, and they're contributing to the noise and the unhealthy noise.
Yeah, and stirring confirmation bias. Just going back to what Dr. Yusim said about leadership. Rabbi, you and I teach that everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah.
The character of the kingdom emanates from the king. And I don't know, Dr. Yusim, if we're talking trickle down here. I think it's a lot more. I don't think it's trickling. If it was trickling, I wouldn't mind. I would be so alarmed. I think there's more. How do you respond to that?
Doctor, hold that thought, because we're going to take a break here and come back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi in discussion with Dr. Annie Yusim.
Yeah, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And we continue our discussion with Dr. Annie Yusim, author of Fulfilled: How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life. So, to back what we'll be talking about, you think character is important or less important now than it's been in the past? Do people really feel it's a priority? Or is, as the Rev said, policy uber alles, and the heck with character?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think character is more important than ever. I think that we have a mental health crisis right now in our country, and part of that is because there is lack of role models and lack of individuals who can show people what to do and how to handle very difficult times and challenges. And that's why we need individuals and leaders to step up to show how to transmute darkness into light, essentially, how to transmute feelings like hatred, anger, states like polarization, polarity, into kindness, compassion, wisdom, courage, and to be able to live from that space. Just recently I was speaking in Bhutan at the Bhutan Innovation Forum, and they were talking about the principles of enlightened leadership. And this is a country, a tiny little landlocked country of 700,000 people between China and India, a tiny country. And they talked about the three qualities of enlightened leadership that I think are actually so valuable and important here. And they talked about those being courage, wisdom, and compassion taken together with selfless service. And so wisdom is actually beyond knowledge. It's the ability to see the future. But without courage, you don't act on what you see and remain in stagnation. But if you act without compassion, you become an authoritarian dictator. And so you need all three of those things: courage, wisdom, and compassion taken with selfless service. And these are the qualities and that I hope the character of our leadership will hold.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. Selfless service. But unfortunately, we're more driven by self-serving. Understanding that, we want power, and we want that power to service us in some way. You said we're in a national crisis due to lack of role models. Have we gotten to the place where winning is more important than character and conduct?
I think that it certainly feels like that, right, during these elections. But even though it feels like that, that's certainly not the case. And at the root of everything is character and choices, and empowering people to make really, really good choices on their own, choices regarding their own lives, their own day-to-day, and how they're going to treat other people within their community that are similar to them, and other people who may be of different socioeconomic class, racial class, religion, etc., to be able to have a society and community of peace and compassion, as opposed to something where we are pointing fingers and blaming without really understanding.
Yeah, that ugly rhetoric.
Rabbi, if I may, I'm sorry, but because
ahead.
you keep stimulating questions in me, because during the break, you made the comment during the break to Doctor and I that half the country, and you're going based upon the vote, half the country doesn't want character. Is that really true on the ground where that half of the country experiences life?
I don't know if they don't want character, but it's not the number one concern is policy. We have to change policy. That's the first box we check. Character, further down.
Doctor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, character plays a very significant role in, the influence that the candidates have ultimately. And let's actually talk about the specific aspects of character that people are looking for. They're looking for trustworthiness, integrity, leadership qualities like empathy, resilience, accountability. Obviously, they want somebody with a public image that is going to be inspiring in some way, and someone who's going to have long-term impact. But I think trustworthiness, integrity, and empathy, resilience, accountability, that's really at the root. And I don't think that we have to choose between character and policy. Ideally, we have one president and we can have both. And if we have a president who might, have weaknesses, as many people do, then he can work on whatever those weaknesses are and try to bolster their own, aspects of character in order to be a better role model.
I think that the rhetoric, looking back at the election, was ugly on both sides. We heard the word Hitler thrown time and time again at President Trump. We heard garbage thrown against those who supported him. I mean, the kind of ugly, ugly statements that were made just exacerbate the tensions. And we're not going to go to this better place you recommend overnight. It's going to take time. People are angry, and that has to subside. And then we can, assume the more noble qualities. But are people entitled to go through a period of real anger with what the other side they felt did to them?
Absolutely. And I have talked to so many of my clients and patients about this, that right now, for many, this is a grieving period, a period of mourning what could have been and what they had hoped for. And it's really important to give yourself that period to really feel what you're feeling, to go through your process, and to get to a place where you have some resolution on, okay, I have come to a place of acceptance. And let's also just, take a step back, and what does this mourning period entail? Whenever we mourn, there's actually 5 stages of mourning, and they come in various orders, and they have the mnemonic DABDA. So denial, anger, bargaining with oneself, with the world, with God, then depression, and then acceptance. Eventually, we get to acceptance, but we need to let ourselves go through that process. And it's really important that we take that time to let ourselves heal before we move forward and, pretend that everything's good.
What about those not mourning? What about those who are extremely happy? One side is very happy.
That's true.
And how do you get them to understand, well, the other side is hurting. I'm happy, they're hurting. Who cares that they're hurting? I mean, when does the empathy kick in?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are very happy with the results of this election,
right.
And God bless. And it's like we talked about, they have a moral obligation to create the best world that they see fit, as do we. And this is part of the democracy, but the democracy continues. It doesn't end here, and it doesn't end with elections. Tomorrow is a new day, and we all have a responsibility in doing what we can to make our country the best country that we want to live in.
Rev?
Yeah. Go ahead, Rabbi.
I saw someone who said, change occurs throughout election periods. We remember there was the Reagan Revolution, followed by the Clinton Revolution, followed by the Bush Revolution, followed by the Obama Revolution, right? The Trump Revolution. In other words, we don't stay fixed in one period with one candidate or, followers winning time after. There are changes that happen. So, you can celebrate the moment, but realize there are other moments with different leaders. So that's why we need to continue to have this communication with one another, because ultimately the solution is found working together.
Doc, would you say that people are generally afraid of change because it disrupts stability, continuity, uh, uh, established traditions? Do we feel more comfortable when things continue the way they are, uh, or do we fear change? Let's put it that way. Are we afraid?
Yeah, I think that, we as human beings often will seek comfort and stability. But oftentimes those two things, there's comfort and stability. And then on the other side of that is growth and transformation. And if we seek too much comfort and stability, it could be at the detriment of growth and transformation. And change is necessary for us to grow. Change is necessary for us to enliven our perspectives. And it's two different ways to live life. And you can, choose one versus the other, but often it's the life of growth and transformation that is a richer, more fulfilled life, and yet one where you have to confront your fears on a regular basis.
You know what I find, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm right, is that people who are rooted in their faith traditions live with hope. Whatever it is, it's going to get better. Whatever it is, I'm going to do my best to make it better. So religion comes with responsibility. And I find that people who are committed to a particular faith, no matter what it is, see the bigger picture, see the whole, see that we are our brother and sisters keepers. I do have a responsibility. It's not just that parochial view. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I really love that, Rabbi, and I think that that's absolutely right. And this makes me think of Dr. Martin Seligman's work. He's the founder of the positive psychology movement, and he has this concept of learned optimism, which is the antidote to this concept of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is probably what many are feeling right now, and learned optimism is us taking concrete actions to be able to learn to be more optimistic. Optimism can be learned, and this is something that, in a way, for many of us right now, it's steps that we can take in order to start to have more hope and to deal with some of the fear that we're feeling in our hearts.
Wow, that's good. So learned optimism versus learned,
helplessness.
I don't want to say helplessness. So is that learned helplessness that foster a victim mentality?
Absolutely. It's essentially when you feel that you have no control over life. It's the little rat that's trying to, push a lever to try to get food and has no control. There's absolutely no correlation between when the food comes and when that rat actually pushes a lever. So it learns to be completely helpless. It's like, I have no control over this, and it gives up and dies.
So, Rev, you know that Dr. Yusim had a problem getting into some good schools during her life, seeking her getting into a profession. So she went to Yale, Stanford. Now you're doing something at Yale. Am I right, Doctor?
I am. I'm a clinical assistant professor at Yale, and I'm working with one of the deputy chairs, Dr. Christopher Pittenger, to create the Yale Mental Health and Spirituality Center, which is going to be a bridge between the Divinity School and the medical school at Yale.
Wow. It's amazing when you think about the need to address issues of mental health in our society in ways that we never imagined. Isn't that because Is it because we didn't realize that we had mental health issues as a society? Is it that we're talking about it more? Um, why is it so front and center now, doctor?
Yeah, it's a great question. Why has there been an upsurgence in diagnoses of depression, anxiety, psychosis, addiction, etc., over time, and suicidality? And that's a really important question. And I think that there are many factors. I think the stresses of life. I think that a number of things, unfortunately, things such as social media, we know that that has had a huge impact on child and adolescent mental health. And, the antidote to that, if indeed technology is a disruptor of our mental well-being, being in nature and removing oneself from technology is the anti-disruptor. It's the thing that actually connects you to yourself and enables you to restore health and balance. I mean, those are just a few things. And there's many other things. It's linked to probably our environments, our food supply, all kinds of things that have changed over time that on some level have impacted how our mental well-being operates.
Doctor, we've come to the end of the segment. I want to leave both of you with this thought. I was reading about a professor who gave a test to the class. He put a dot on the page. You're probably familiar with this, Dr. Yusim. A dot on the page, and he asked the students, what do you see? And many students responded, I see a dot. Other students responded, I see the pupil of an eye. And both groups failed to see the open space that allowed for potential design.
The page. Yeah.
Right, the rest of the page.
That's good. That's good.
And I think as all of us look at the election, some like the results, some loathe the results, but both sides need to look at the bigger picture, look at the open page and say, now how are we going to go forward and create a world that is beneficial for all of us? That open page is the challenge for us. Dr. Anna Yusim, thank you. Look forward to talking with, and by the way, Rev, there's no charge for this session with the doctor. For me, for you, Rev, that's a different story.
I was taking notes, man. Are you kidding me? I was taking notes. I'm always a student. Thank you, doctor, for your perspective and just what you've been able to achieve in your field and now applying it to the Yale Mental Health Center, right? Did I get that right? Yale Mental Health Center?
Thank you so much, Reverend and Rabbi. It is always such a pleasure to be here with you.
Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on 77 WABC.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R.
Reverend, I thought that was a very, very therapeutic session. Right?
Look, I found out that you were a client, so I can understand why you would say something like that, Rabbi. I get it.
But, it's always good to, when you have conversations with people who are so smart, they open up your eyes to things you may not have seen. And it's important to listen to the other. And I think we've lost that art of listening. People win, people lose, but my God, the ones who lost can do more to listen to the ones who won. The ones who won can do more by listening to those who lost.
You said something that makes me think about the power of diversity. It's our strength. You spoke about Dr. Yusim as someone who's so proficient in her field, so knowledgeable. And that's what we need. We need experts in the various areas of life to come together. And that's what diversity is all about. We all bring something special to the table that helps build the common good. And we kind of forget that. If everybody was, the same, conformity, that's, or uniformity, that's not our strength. Diversity is our strength.
They say when you point a finger at someone else, you have other fingers pointing at yourself.
Yeah,
right?
True.
And I think, we're going to go through this period of the accusatory fingers, and okay, people have a right to say, look at what you did to get us to this point. You have failed us. Okay, now what? And the now what requires more of a concerted effort. There comes a point where you got to stop looking at the other in terms of blame and start looking at the other as an ally in finding solutions. We can't succeed with a balkanized America. And that's going to be a challenge. And that's where I think faith leaders and leaders have that moral responsibility. What can I do to make the circle bigger? I know I'm not going to get everybody in there, not going to make everybody happy, but I can make it bigger than it is.
Absolutely.
Right. So
yeah, and I will tell you, I want to point to something that she said, language that she used, because we could have spent another segment just talking about it. She didn't call it optimism or helplessness. She said learned optimism, learned helplessness. So when we feel that we're out of control or don't have control, it's something that we learned. It's something that has been taught to us in some way, or that we experience, and it became part of who we are as an individual. So if we learn something, if we are who we are by what we learn, we can unlearn and learn something new. But we have to be willing to do that, Rabbi.
Yeah. And also recognize when we offer prayers in the synagogue, prayers are written in the plural. It's about the we. It's not about the individual very often. It's about the we. When we offer prayers for the country, it's we all are in the country. When we offer prayer for the president, it's the president of the United States, not the prayer of one party. And I would hope people look with both eyes with that expansive view, because we cannot afford to go on this road that is very exclusive, that is very narrow, if we're going to reach a point where, life is better for all of us. But we got to be...
Rabbi, you keep inspiring me here. I know we usually bring this part of the program to a close, or ending, but you brought up a very important thing that I think you and I, as our responsibility as faith leaders to our audience, to discuss, because I will tell you, there were prayer meetings being held by Democrats concerning the outcome of the election. There were prayer meetings being held by Republicans concerning the outcome of the election. How do we reconcile that? How do we understand with, people praying? And these were Christian. They identify with the same God, identify with the same power of prayer and gift of access to God through prayer. And yet they were praying for opposite outcomes. How do we respond to that?
So they feel.
How do we help the public understand that?
They feel that God is a member of a particular party, right? And that's not the God we understand. And I don't think any of our texts support that kind of thinking. And we have a responsibility to speak a little bit louder and to say, you know what, let's find the God who represents both of us, and let's stop looking in one direction. So
we've conflated God with a particular political party?
Some have, and that doesn't work too well in the long run. Maybe you'll get some satisfaction in the short run, but not throughout history.
So let's talk about a text, Rabbi, where, Joshua is now taking over from Moses. In our text, it's the 5th chapter in, so he's just assumed, leadership control. Moses is gone, and God says, I'm going to be with you, Joshua, the way I was with Moses. Be strong, very courageous. You know the text. And then we get to chapter 5. And Joshua is preparing to deal with Jericho as part of, the mission to expand. And all of a sudden, he has this encounter with a man. He calls him a man, but he's dressed in military garb. And Joshua asks him, are you for us or for them? Whose side are you on? And he responds by saying, neither. I'm here as captain of the hosts of the Lord in our language. You're familiar with that text.
Yeah.
Here he's talking, this individual, which we believe is, an angel or a revelation of God, of Yahweh in some way. But the conversation, he says, neither. I'm not on your side, but I'm here representing the Lord. Now he says this to Joshua, the new leader of a chosen people, a covenant people, the nation of Israel. How is it that he could say that I'm not on your side, even though there's that relationship and identity? Is it not for them to assume such a thing?
I think
How do you unpack that?
I think there are times when we have to look at both sides and find room. For example, when you pray for peace, do you pray for peace only for your own people, or do you pray for peace for other people where you could live with one another? I think if you look at texts, it always tells you don't just pray for your own, but pray for the others in a world where we can have that kind of recognition of the other. So you can be for both living together, assuming, of course, you have people who want to live together. But I do think that the partisanship at some point has to give way to the larger, to the collective, not to the individual.
Do you think that it's making a statement that we should first check to make sure we're on God's side, as opposed to assuming that he's on ours?
Yeah, I think it's always good to step back. When we pray for peace, we step back and take a look. Where are we standing?
Mm-hmm.
And are we doing, when you walk into a synagogue above the ark, it very often says, know before whom you stand. Know that you're accountable. So, yeah, I think those kinds of evaluations are very, very healthy. But at the end of the day, we're not going to find peace unless we find partners for peace. And that means listening to those who disagree, but those who say together we can create a peaceful climate, peaceful society where we can both accept one another. We've come to the end of the segment.
Amen. Good way. Good preaching, Rabbi.
Thank
Good
you.
preaching. We've closed this program out. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hope you learned something. It was enlightening for you, and that you will continue to join us right here every Sunday morning, 7 a.m. on 77 WABC, the Rev
and the Rabbi.
God bless.